Hey, what's up everybody? Time for another Game Theory video. Remember, if you like the videos, like, sub, silly, comment, share, support the channel if you can. I appreciate Super Chat, PayPal, Patreon. Super like the video. If you do, I appreciate it. Thanks. It doesn't hurt you to subscribe. It only hurts me. It only hurts me when you don't. I do gotta do another FGC on NBC video eventually. It will come. They just take a long time to do. So, continuing my new series, perhaps, of things that suck about Super Turbo, dude, because all games have their good and bad. So let's do another video about that. And while doing this, I want to answer some questions, right? So to go over that last video as well, I was talking about how, and the reason I showed the example of how Super Turbo added this, or took away this frame of doing combos, is because I think it's interesting because it's something that has never been, well, I say never, who knows? There might be some hack of the game that it was addressed, but I don't know. But it's something that was not addressed in HD Remix, let's say. It's something that was not addressed in, say, that new Legacy hack or whatever it was. And I just think it's interesting because I can't think of an actual reason, a real reason for why they took away a frame when you start comboing it, guys. So let's look at a few examples too that I didn't show in the last video. Let's just say we do here. Let's say Bison does a not optimal, let's call it positioning of the sweep, right? So if I punish this, I can get a fireball, and that's a true combo right there, right? But if I'm in a Super Turbo versus Super Turbo character, right? This doesn't combo. I mean, I think I was close enough for that to hit. Even example like this is actually from this distance, this is deceptively tight to get this to combo. Like, watch, I just missed right here. Doesn't combo. But if you reverse a super and below character, hyper fighting, if we're talking about that at least, right? This is pretty easy, right? Even if we were to do something like this, let's say I did a duck little kick and I tried a hurricane kick, this won't work, right? Because of that one frame less of stun, right? Which is interesting because here's something maybe you don't know. Old Ryu does have sort of a punish for a farther away situation like this. It actually leads to an unblockable, right? Let's say we did this, right? From this distance, we can do a duck little kick, duck short into a hurricane kick and a combos. And if you know something about, say if we were playing super, if we were playing hyper fighting in reverse, and we're both old characters, let's say, I do hurricane kick right here. I can do a safe jump into an unblockable hurricane kick. And it also, since we're saying a safe jump, safe from reversals. Pretty interesting. Obviously, that doesn't work if you're actually in Super Turbo, right? But a caveat that might be interesting to you. Now, the main reason this video I want to talk about something that sucks about Super Turbo, and it's something that I talked about in my video of Dhalsim versus Ryu. And I think some people, maybe they just purposely skip over the first minute of the video since I say a lot of the same thing all the time the first minute. I literally said it's slightly clickbait, but I talked about Ryu versus Dhalsim because it's an interesting example of how footsie's changed and it made a match very difficult for Ryu to ever consistently win. And it makes it consistently bad because of the way they change footsies. And I think on that example, you could say that Dhalsim is a badly designed character in Super Turbo, I think, from a certain perspective. And he set a bad precedent with how they allowed you to do proximity normals, right? At any distance, right? So I'm going to show a few clips and then I'm going to show a picture, right? So say if we're Dhalsim, let's say if we're Super Dhalsim, right? Old school Dhalsim, right? Let's say if we're right here. Now look at this distance where I am, right? At this distance, I don't get the close duck medium punch, right? However, at this distance, right, my throw range, I think Dhalsim might have the longest throw range in the game. Correct me if I'm wrong. I can throw you, right? That's sort of Dhalsim's counter, let's say, in that range, right? Even another example like this, if we were to show this, from this distance, guess what? I don't get a duck medium kick, right? And this is why this is going to be important, right? I get the slide. And we'll show this again. I got to move just a smidge forward to get it. Now, at that smidge where I move forward, I'm not actually at the optimal quotation marks, let's say, range of the priority of the hurt boxes and hit boxes, right? Another example, before I get into this picture and we start to more talk about why this is a bad precedent, right? If we're to say Blanca jumps right here, right? My slide is not a does everything anti-air versus Blanca, right? However, guess what? Because I can control the proximity of my normals now, right? Well, I can easily just duck jab it if you need to see that again. We can watch that clip again really quickly. Oh, no, we can't, because that's the quality control here. Can we do this? Let's try this again. This is the quality control you get here on the AFGC, on NPC slide, but also from there, I can just now. Now, let's go to the picture in question, right? As I try to find paint. I said one of the problems with Super Turbo, and when I was talking about the Ryu versus Dhalsim matchup, is it really showed how they kind of ruined footsies, right? From a certain perspective, right? And again, not every character should be able to do everything. And from a certain standpoint, I do think it's interesting that Dhalsim can randomly jab as an anti-air. I'm not against having awkward counters, excuse me, but I do think it shows a brain fart. If we're looking at like just the hurt boxes and hit boxes of this, and remember that Dhalsim's duck forward is actually faster than Ryu mashing on a duck short. I think it's the fastest normal in the game. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not a frame data nerd. Besides Blanca's neutral jump fierce. Correct me if I'm wrong. So if you look at the red and the blue, like look at this. When I showed that footsies, Dhalsim should not have quotation marks better footsies than Ryu and Super Turbo, right? If we're to think about the Dhalsim versus Ryu match traditionally, if we're thinking about Ryu as a character that checks and he slowly moves himself in, Dhalsim can't check you like that, right? But Super Turbo, they allowed Dhalsim to start checking characters, right? Like there is no reason, like look at this, right? Look at Dhalsim's duck medium punch. Look at the blue all the way down back here, right? Dhalsim has more range even on his close normals than Ryu does. And they have better priority. And they're faster. Do you think that's a little bit of a mismatch? Like, look at that. You see the red. It's not like medium doesn't go anywhere, but Dhalsim's checking moves. Dhalsim can now check better than a character like Ryu, who used to be a character that checked you, right? And of course, it made it even worse because if we look at the blue right here, right? At least if we were to go to, say, if you pick Super Ryu, the blue's right here. The blue's right here, right? Now, they might not have as long as range still as that Dhalsim can do, but I think this shows a bad example of, you know, just being able to control your normals. And this is something that they did change, I believe, in the new Legacy remix. I think whatever it is, that guy, Born SPD. And that's not me talking shit about the guy. I'm just naive to him, you know, but I know he made that. And I've said before, and when people ask me about HD remix and someone asked again in the comments, well, talk about all these changes that Sirlin did. And it's just kind of like, I don't know if people want me to talk shit about Sirlin per se. Again, I've never had a bad interaction with him per se. I just talked about apparently he used a PlayStation controller on a girl. And I've heard people say that. And that I meant that as that's like how far I'm like grasping at straws. That, I mean, the only drama that I've ever heard with Sirlin is basically he used a PlayStation controller on a girl, which who knows, maybe she liked it. I mean, girls can be freaks too. You know, she might have liked it. Might have put on the DualShock, maybe Metal Gear Solid. He went to the Metal Gear Solid portion of Metal Gear Solid 1 and gave her a good time. I don't know. I'm not sure. Right. And I know there was animosity for how HD Remix came out and that he, you know, seemingly didn't actually care about what people had to say. And my only opinion about the changes is, you know, I just thought that for a guy that you would think is big brain or considered one of the smarter people in the community, I just thought the changes were generally kind of boring. And it just wasn't that interesting to me, right? And I tried to say that, you know, I'm sure it's a hard kind of middle ground to, you want to change a game enough that it is the game worth playing, but it still has to be true to the old game maybe. So maybe he had a hard time finding a balance of that. I just thought, and again, the Dragon Punch thing with Ken, that he never thought about doing Dragon Punch to Dragon Punch over and over again. And then someone did it in the beta and he's like, oh, that's too good. And I saw that and I was like, what? Right. So I thought that made him look stupid when he said that. But, you know, in general, I don't have anything bad to say. I just thought that the changes were generally uninteresting. But the new legacy thing, and this isn't to say that I agree with everything in the new legacy, but the new legacy, I respect the nerddom of it. Like it seems like I don't think everything was thought out in a good way, but he did try to explain himself, and he put in there certainly was a lot of thought in it when I look at it, right? You know, again, this isn't me to talk shit about the guy per se. I'm not naive, or I'm naive to him, but you know, I just thought that I don't agree everything with the new legacy thing, but the new legacy thing, I do think there's so much nuance to it. I respect the nerdiness of it, right? Not that I agree with everything, but to go back where I was, even in the new legacy, I think he like turned down or took away a little bit of the red and added a little bit more blue, because again, Dhalsim shouldn't be in a character that should be able to check you like this, right? It just is silly. And I think it goes to show it's maybe perhaps the first, or I guess you would say it is the first. It's the first example of, and I've said before, what is one of the problems of, say, like a game like Alpha, right? Alpha, when you take away less moves and you start having attacks that used to be your proximity normals, some of these proximity normals that now you can do them at any distance, right? Now they become too powerful. Like why do a character like Ken, why can Ken walk forward with a stand medium punch, a stand strong? A character like a Shoto should not have a powerful harassment tool like that is like, you know, capable of hitting you when you're ducking, all that kind of stuff, right? It did add some interesting things. Like I've made videos about how Ryu's stand forward, the stand medium kick in the original Street Fighter Alpha 1, not Street Fighter Alpha 2 because they changed it, but the original Street Fighter Alpha 1 is kind of a fascinating move with the way that they worked if you think about it from a sort of deeper perspective. But again, Alpha set a bad precedent of taking away, you know, close normals and then adding it, allowing you to do them from far away. And we already have examples of when you can do a close normal from far away, often you will do that close normal, right? Just like even if you were to go to a Street Fighter Alpha 3, what happens when you see Street Fighter Alpha 3? What is actually, besides, forget just even the Vism infinites, what is one of the reasons that Vism is good? Because they can use their close normals from far away. And often these close normals are faster and they have priority that they shouldn't have with the hitboxes and hurtboxes, right? It's kind of it's interesting if you think about that, you know, Dhalsim is perhaps the first bad example of why this is a bad idea, right? Like I do think Dhalsim being able to control his normals isn't necessarily bad just for him, but if you look at a game like Super Turbo, they should not have the priority and speed that they do. It's silly, especially when you think of like a character like Ryu. You took away his ability to check. Not that he has no footsies anymore. Again, if we're thinking about footsies from a actual traditional standpoint of what we used to call footsies when I was a kid, right? But it just is, it's silly, right? And I think it's a pretty big brain fart. And I would say it's a pretty stupid thing about Super Turbo. And I could only assume that perhaps the developers thought, oh, well, this is, you know, game changing, which I guess you could say it is game changing. It wasn't done before, right? But maybe they're like, oh, it's game changing. This will be too nuanced, man. This will be harder to use Dhalsim. Okay. You know, I don't know about that, Bob. I don't know. I'm just saying, Pikachu. Crap, I haven't done the Bob voice in a while. I don't know about that, Pikachu. Is that the Bob voice? Dude, I don't think I've made an FGC on NBC video in a year, right? It's been a while, I think. But anyway, so I think I would say Dhalsim, the priority and speed on his being able to do his proximity normals anywhere is a pretty big brain fart of Super Turbo that was not thought out very well, especially when you think of that you actually took away the priority of a character like Ryu and his footsies, which, again, I said before, I cannot actually think of if you would have kept Ryu's footsies, you know, the priority and speed of them the way that they were in Super, that it actually, you know, turns any matchup that is positive for him into a complete degeneracy. It actually just normally helps his bad matchups a little bit. I can't think of any good matchup or even matchup where it just is like, oh God, Ryu has better footsies. It's insane. It's too good, right? You know, I mean, because even if you think about a game like Super Turbo, when we think about how footsies really, and I think Super Turbo is an interesting game of perspective in that way, right? Because look at Guile. Super Turbo Guile is one of the most amazing characters ever. If you think about like the ether of like fighting games and how it changed, just his Sabat kick changing, because you got to remember, and it's such a matter of fact, and I've made videos about this before, it's such a matter of fact that you think, oh, Guile's Sabat kick goes over lows and it hits you. But you got to remember, before Super Turbo, it did not do that. Guile could not control his Sabat kick, right? It went over lows, but it didn't hit you. It wasn't until Super that the Sabat kick could even hit you low like that, and he couldn't even control it. So that's why I think about Super Turbo. You're like, whoa, footsies is changing. This is crazy. It's again, Guile is one of the more interesting Super Turbo guys, one of the more interesting characters in the history of fucking fighting games. The way that they designed him, I think, and is pretty crazy. And especially when you think about the Ryu versus Guile matchup, would Ryu having his better checking normals to check a duck forward, would that be bad in Super Turbo when you gave Guile the Sabat kick in the first place to beat that? It actually just adds another layer to it, right? So I digress, but I would say that Dhalsim's changes in Super Turbo, I would say, are kind of a bad thing about Super Turbo. It wasn't not necessarily super well thought out, I think, right? Not bad that he can control it, right? You got to, characters and games have to progress, but the priority and speed on them is nonsense. And it was a pretty big brain fart, I think. Anyway, remember, if you like the videos, like, sub, silly comment, share, support the channel if you can. I appreciate it. Thanks. The end.